Ryan's office revenge.
I knew I was done the moment the new VP called our security protocols legacy friction and smirked like he'd just solved world hunger. But that wasn't the real kick in the gut. That came 20 minutes later when I found my termination paperwork sitting on top of my sandwich in the break room fridge. Turkey Club still cold. My career colder. That's me. Roger Bennett, 54 years old, divorced once. 2 kids in college who think I work with computers and leave it at that. Senior IT security architect at Secure Finance Solutions, or I guess former senior IT security architect. I'd been at that company for 15 years, long enough to see 4 CEOs, 3 major system overhauls, and enough digital transformation buzzwords to choke a horse. My job wasn't flashy, but it was crucial. You know, all that financial innovation magic that gets investors excited and regulators nodding. Yeah, none of that happens unless someone quietly keeps all the security certifications, federal compliance, and multi-state banking authorizations running like clockwork. That was me, the guy in the server room, the one who remembered passwords, knew which cables went where, and could explain PCI compliance without PowerPoint slides. Nobody noticed me until I left, and then they noticed everything. But before I dive into the mess, let me walk you through the kind of hell only a seasoned security architect like me can create. Picture this. Middle of Q2, secure finance flying high. We're processing $25 million in daily transactions across 12 states. Fresh round of VC money being dangled like a carrot, and the CEO quoting our growth metrics like they're tattooed on his forehead. Meanwhile, I'm quietly renewing our PCI DSS certification before the June 30th deadline, like I have every year since 2009. Same routine, same paperwork, same federal agencies that don't care about your startup dreams if your security documentation isn't perfect. I didn't ask for applause. I didn't even ask for a working coffee machine. I just did my job, the way you do when you've been around long enough to see what happens when things break. 20 years in the Navy taught me that systems fail when people get careless, and 15 years at Secure Finance taught me that financial systems fail spectacularly. And then Hayden shows up. Hayden Walsh, VP of Digital Innovation, which is corporate speak for break things fast and call it progress. He swaggered in fresh from some crypto startup, all designer jeans and enthusiasm, drank cold brew like it was medicine, called meetings jam sessions, and used the phrase move fast and break things in actual conversation with a straight face. Real peak tech bro nonsense. The kind that makes you wonder if these kids ever had to explain to a federal examiner why their security logs don't match their compliance reports. Within a week, he'd reorganized 2 departments, cut half the QA team, and replaced our security review process with something he called agile risk assessment. The man once used the phrase security theater in a Slack thread and actually added a laughing emoji. I saved that screenshot. Figured I might need it someday. The first time he looked at me, he squinted like I was part of the furniture that came with the office. "Remind me again what you do?" he asked on a Tuesday. I remember because the printer was jammed and I was already having a day. Federal compliance, PCI certifications, security audit management, everything that touches regulatory risk, I said, same way I'd explained it to his 3 predecessors. He nodded like he'd just heard someone say blah blah clipboard blah. I could see it in his eyes. This was just red tape to him, just bureaucratic friction slowing down his vision of seamless digital disruption. By Thursday, he decided my position was innovation friction. No warning, no exit interview, just a meeting invite titled alignment chat and a stone-faced HR rep clutching a manila envelope with my name spelled wrong. They got the first name right, but somehow turned Bennett into Bennett. After 15 years, they couldn't even spell my name correctly on my pink slip. I was out by noon. No farewell lunch, no handoff meeting, no thanks for keeping us compliant for a decade and a half. Just a cardboard box and a security escort to the parking lot. Nobody looked up from their screens as I walked out. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they just didn't care. I wasn't angry at first. More stunned, like someone had hit me with a bag of concrete mixed with confusion. I packed my things, 2 coffee mugs, a stress ball shaped like a server rack, and a sticky note that said, "Don't forget Federal Reserve audit response by Friday." Guess I don't have to worry about that anymore. But here's the thing about working in compliance for 15 years. You develop habits. You finish tasks even when they're not your problem anymore. So before I left, I did one last procedure. Not revenge, not sabotage, just following protocol one final time. I opened up the Federal Security Authorization portal, the same system I'd been logging into every few weeks for longer than some of our employees had been out of high school. My name was listed as the primary authorized security officer across all our banking partnerships. Roger Bennett, typed in Arial Black, linked to my social security number and federal credentials. The system was asking for an updated contact, standard procedure when someone leaves. I clicked edit, deleted my name, typed in Hayden Walsh. Didn't forge anything, didn't hide it, didn't add any creative commentary. Just updated the records. He was the acting VP now, so technically he should be the authorized officer, right? No malice, no drama. I saved the form, logged the change in the system notes, and logged out. Security compliance is about accuracy, and technically he was now responsible for all federal banking security authorizations. Only problem? He had no idea what that meant. The form was still legally accurate. It just wasn't complete anymore because Hayden Walsh, VP of Digital Innovation, had no clue that being the authorized agent meant you had to submit wet ink notarized documentation to 6 different federal agencies within 30 days, or the authorization evaporated like steam off hot coffee. I dropped my badge off with reception, walked past the motivational poster that said "Innovate fearlessly," stepped into the June heat, and drove home to my empty apartment. That's when the real storm began. Hayden Walsh made his entrance like a TED Talk speaker who'd snorted too many productivity podcasts. First day officially in charge, he showed up in a Tesla with plates that read, "Disrupt," wearing sneakers so white I could see my 15 years of underpaid loyalty reflected in the soles. He breezed through the front lobby like he owned the building, fist-bumped the security guard, not out of respect, just to prove he was people-friendly, and headed straight to his glass-walled office with its standing desk and that ridiculous treadmill desk hybrid that hummed like a broken air conditioner. By 9:30, he'd already changed our Monday security briefing to Innovation Huddle, complete with emojis in the calendar invite. By 10 o'clock, he was holding court in the all-hands meeting like he was launching a unicorn startup instead of managing security at a financial services firm with active federal oversight. "Let's kill legacy thinking," he said, sipping oat milk like it was champagne. "Security is important, sure, but it's just necessary friction, like getting your car inspected. Nobody likes it, but you've got to do it smart, not hard." Nervous laughter from the younger crowd who didn't know better. The older employees exchanged glances, wondering which department he'd gut next. A few people looked around for me, but I wasn't there anymore. I was at home, watching Netflix and pretending I didn't have 15 years of institutional knowledge evaporating in real time. He didn't call on anyone specific during the meeting, didn't mention compliance by name, but the way his eyes would have skated past my empty chair if I'd been there told the whole story. In his world, security was overhead. Process was friction. Experience was legacy burden. At 11:47 a.m., according to the Outlook calendar I could still access for another few hours, he scheduled individual alignment chats with everyone in the security department. 15-minute blocks, no agenda, just the corporate equivalent of speed dating with your executioner. I didn't need to be there to know how those went. Same script he'd used on me, probably word for word. "Thanks for your service. We're restructuring. It's nothing personal, just optimization." The kind of language that sounds like business strategy but feels like getting fired by a PowerPoint slide. Meanwhile, back at my apartment, I was discovering that unemployment feels different at 54 than it did at 30. At 30, getting fired is a setback. At 54, with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, it's an earthquake. My daughter Emma called that night to ask about her tuition payment, and I had to tell her I'd transitioned to consulting. She didn't buy it, but she didn't push either. Smart kid. But here's what Hayden didn't know, couldn't know, because he'd never bothered to understand what I actually did. Federal banking security isn't like updating your iPhone. You can't just click accept and hope for the best. Every authorization has a chain. Every chain has a weak link, and every weak link has someone's signature on it, someone who's legally liable when things go wrong. For 15 years, that someone had been me. I'd signed the documents, maintained the relationships, answered the late-night calls from federal examiners who needed clarification on our protocols. I was the human face of Secure Finance's compliance program, the guy who could explain why our systems were trustworthy without reading from a script. Now that guy was gone, and Hayden had just made himself responsible for everything I used to handle. The federal forms I'd updated listed him as the new authorized security officer, but forms are just paperwork. The real authorization comes from federal agencies that don't care about your org chart or your innovation philosophy. They care about credentials, about experience, about the ability to answer technical questions without Google. Hayden had none of those things. He had an MBA and a Tesla, and he was about to discover that neither one impresses the Federal Reserve. The first ping came Monday morning at 8:15 a.m. I know because I was still getting copied on some automated alerts, and this one made me spit coffee across my kitchen table. Federal Reserve portal had flagged a name mismatch in the authorization chain. Nothing catastrophic, just a digital hiccup that meant someone needed to verify the new contact information. The email was standard bureaucratic language, missing verification. Documents for new security officer, Walsh, Hayden. Please submit within 72 hours to maintain active authorization status. Standard stuff if you knew what you were looking at. But nobody at Secure Finance did, because the one person who understood federal compliance protocols was at home in his bathrobe, reading the alert like it was entertainment. I didn't call them, didn't send a helpful email, didn't even feel particularly vindictive about it. This was just the system working exactly the way it was designed to work. Federal agencies don't trust new faces just because someone updates a form. They want proof. They want credentials. They want to know that the person responsible for security authorization actually understands what security means. Meanwhile, the cracks were spreading under Secure Finance like fault lines before an earthquake. By 10:45 a.m., the FDIC portal kicked back a red flag on our primary banking relationship with First National Trust. The alert was technical but clear. Security authorization pending. Officer verification incomplete. Translation: we can't let you keep processing transactions until you tell us who this new guy is and prove he knows what he's doing. That same afternoon, our biggest client, Coastal Credit Union, received an automated freeze notice from our processing system. They flagged regulatory inconsistency in security documentation and paused all transaction processing effective immediately. The official email was corporate polite, but the subtext was crystal clear. We're not risking our necks for a company whose paperwork smells like amateur hour. I found out because Janet Morrison from Coastal called my personal cell. We'd worked together for 8 years and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. Roger, what the hell is happening over there? Our compliance team is getting alerts that your security authorization is incomplete. Who's Hayden Walsh and why hasn't he submitted verification documents? I was sitting in my kitchen looking at job postings on Indeed, and suddenly I was back in the game whether I wanted to be or not. I'm not with Secure Finance anymore, Janet. They let me go last week. Long pause. They fired you? You've been their federal contact for what, a decade? 15 years. New management decided security was overhead. Jesus Christ, Roger, do you know what this means? We've got $8 million in pending transactions that just got frozen. Our members can't access their accounts. This isn't some minor glitch. This is a full regulatory lockdown. I did know what it meant. I'd seen it happen to other firms, usually right before they went out of business. But I wasn't about to explain that to Janet while I was technically unemployed and potentially liable for giving unauthorized advice. You'll need to talk to their legal department, I said. Spencer Cole is the general counsel. He'll know what to do. Will he? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they just threw away the only guy who understood their compliance structure. She wasn't wrong, but that wasn't my problem anymore, was it? Inside Secure Finance, the emergency lights were starting to flash. Legal's group chat was lighting up with increasingly panicked messages. Wasn't Roger the point person on all federal authorizations? I thought he trained someone before he left. Who the hell is Hayden Walsh and why is his name on federal documents? Nobody said it out loud yet, but the smart ones were starting to piece together the timeline. Roger fired on Thursday. Authorization transfer submitted Thursday. Verification documents due Friday. Friday came and went with no submission from the new authorized officer. By Tuesday morning, a second freeze notice arrived, this one copying the CFO. Transaction processing suspended pending clarification of authorized security officer. The language was bureaucratic, but the message was simple. Fix this, or you're done. Hayden, still riding high on his own. Efficiency, waved it off in a 10-minute alignment sprint meeting. It's all handled, he said, bouncing a stress ball against the glass wall like he was practicing for invisible catch. Just a few back-end hiccups. I'm syncing with legal and compliance. Nothing to worry about. Nobody looked convinced, especially not Spencer Cole, who by then had pulled every federal filing for the past 6 months and discovered that no verification paperwork had been submitted by Hayden or anyone else. The forms showed authorization transfers across multiple agencies: Federal Reserve, FDIC, OCC, state banking commissions, all listing the same name, Hayden Walsh, all showing verification status, outstanding. Spencer didn't say anything for a long moment in the meeting, just sat there with his laptop open, scrolling through screen after screen of incomplete authorizations. Then he asked the question that everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to voice. Hayden, when exactly did you submit the federal verification documents? Blank stare. What documents? The verification documents. When you become an authorized security officer, you have to submit certified credentials to each federal agency within 30 days. It's not automatic. It's not optional. It's the law. Another blank stare. Nobody told me about any documents. Spencer's jaw tightened. Roger would have known. Roger always handled that part. Well, Roger's not here anymore, Hayden snapped. And there it was. The moment when everyone in the room realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Because Roger wasn't there anymore. Roger, who had institutional relationships with federal examiners going back over a decade. Roger, who could call someone at the Fed and get answers in hours instead of weeks. Roger, who understood that federal banking security wasn't about innovation or disruption, it was about trust, built slowly over years of consistent compliance. They'd fired their institutional memory and replaced it with a LinkedIn profile. The whispers started immediately after that meeting. Not loud, not accusatory, just pointed observations. Did anyone see him get proper training? Wasn't Roger supposed to do a handoff? Why would Roger transfer authorization without completing the process? But Spencer was already 3 steps ahead. He'd pulled Roger's termination file and cross-referenced it with the authorization timeline. Roger's last system access was the same day the forms were submitted. The same hour, actually. Spencer opened the Federal Reserve portal and found the submission I'd made my last day. There it was, clear as corporate daylight. Previous authorized officer, Roger Bennett. Updated officer, Hayden Walsh. Verification documents? Outstanding reason for change. Organizational transition per VP Walsh. That last line hit Spencer like a revelation. The form wasn't incomplete because of malice or oversight. It was incomplete because the person who filed it knew exactly what he was doing. Roger had passed the torch legally, accurately, and completely. He'd followed every protocol, documented every change, and left a perfect paper trail. What he hadn't done was complete a process that wasn't his job anymore. The federal agencies didn't care about org charts or innovation strategies. They cared about procedures. And procedures require the new authorized officer to prove his credentials. Hayden hadn't proved anything, except that he didn't know the procedures existed. Spencer closed his laptop and looked around the conference room at faces that were just beginning to understand the scope of their problem. They hadn't just lost a security architect, they'd lost their federal compliance infrastructure, and they'd handed the keys to someone who didn't know how to drive. Thursday night, 9:20 p.m. Secure Finance Emergency Board meeting looked like a crisis management seminar that had gone horribly wrong. CFO Mason Fletcher was sweating so hard his camera kept fogging up. He kept loosening his tie like it was getting tighter with every question from the board. And the questions were coming fast and sharp. What do you mean transaction freeze? How long has Federal Reserve authorization been incomplete? Why weren't we notified about the processing halt until clients started calling? But the question that finally sent Mason into full panic mode came from Garrett Stone, Secure Finance's most vocal investor, whose fund had just dropped $8 million into our Series B round. We can't maintain a growth valuation, he said slowly, clearly, like a judge reading a sentence, if your transaction processing is frozen across multiple states. That's not a fintech company. That's a regulatory nightmare wearing a nice suit. Silence. The kind of silence that only follows the realization that the ship has already hit the iceberg. Mason stammered something about temporary administrative realignment and authorization verification lag, which is corporate speak for we screwed up so badly we don't even have the vocabulary to explain it properly. Spencer Cole, the general counsel, was already pulling up his screen share. He'd spent the last 6 hours documenting every aspect of what he was now calling the compliance breach. One by one, he clicked through the digital forms: Federal Reserve, FDIC, OCC, state banking commissions. Each form showed the same pattern. Change of authorized officer filed June 30th. New officer, Hayden Walsh. Verification documents not submitted. Status, authorization suspended, pending compliance review. This doesn't make sense, Spencer said, more to himself than to the board. Roger always filed verification the same day. He's been doing this for 15 years. He knows the process better than anyone. Someone on the call, board member, investor, maybe a ghost, muttered, unless he did it on purpose. The words hung in the digital air like smoke, heavy, toxic. Unless he did what on purpose, Mason asked, unless he transferred responsibility without completing the process, because he knew exactly what would happen. Now, it wasn't just about paperwork or oversight. It was about intention, because Spencer had looked at the timeline, and the timeline told a story. Roger fired Thursday morning. Authorization transfer submitted Thursday afternoon. No verification submitted Thursday, Friday, or any day since. Spencer clicked on the submission details one more time. The Federal Reserve form Roger had filed my last day. There in plain digital text. Previous officer, Roger Bennett. Updated officer, Hayden Walsh. Verification outstanding, reason for change. Organizational transition per VP Walsh. That last line was the key. Roger hadn't just transferred authorization. He'd documented exactly why he was doing it. Per VP Walsh. Not per company policy, not per transition protocol. Per the guy who'd fired him. He did exactly what he was supposed to, Spencer said quietly. He followed procedure. He transferred responsibility accurately, legally. But what? The CEO's voice crackled through the connection from whatever airport he was stuck in. He transferred responsibility to someone who didn't understand it was his responsibility. The implications sank in slowly. Roger hadn't sabotaged anything. He'd simply done his job one last time, followed the rules precisely, and let the system work exactly as it was designed. Federal banking authorization isn't automatic. It requires active compliance from the authorized officer. If that officer doesn't know he's responsible for ongoing verification, the authorization lapses. And when authorization lapses in the banking industry, everything stops. Spencer opened a new email. Subject line, emergency regulatory consultation required. He was calling Roger. The LinkedIn message arrived while I was grilling burgers on my apartment balcony, trying to pretend I wasn't checking my phone every 10 minutes for job alerts. Spencer's assistant, hi. Roger, hope you're doing well. Would you be available for a brief conversation? General Counsel's urgent request. I stared at the message for a long time, took a sip of beer, watched the burgers sizzle. Then I typed back, I'm available for consulting arrangements. My rates have changed. 12 hours later, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, wearing my best consulting uniform, pressed khakis, polo shirt, and the kind of confidence that comes from holding all the cards. Spencer arrived looking like he'd slept in his car, trailing his paralegal like a lost puppy. No handshake, no pleasantries. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table before they even sat down. What's this? Spencer asked. My consulting rates, and my terms. He read it. His paralegal read over his shoulder and made a small noise that might have been surprise or horror. This is, Spencer started. Non-negotiable, I finished. Weekly rate, minimum 12 weeks. Direct board reporting, full compliance. Authority and equity. Equity, 0.4% equity grant, 4-year vesting. I want skin in the game for fixing what you broke when you fired me. Spencer looked around the coffee shop like he was hoping someone would rescue him. The board will need to approve. The board will approve it, I said, because they don't have a choice. You've got frozen transactions, suspended authorizations, and federal investigators who are going to start asking questions about your compliance program. You need someone who can fix this without triggering a full regulatory audit. I leaned back in my chair. That someone is me. And after 15 years of being treated like overhead, my price has gone up. What about Hayden? Spencer asked. What about him? He's still the VP of Digital Innovation. I smiled, just barely. Hayden can innovate all he wants, but he's not touching anything that requires federal authorization. Ever. That's part of my terms. Spencer nodded slowly like a man accepting the inevitable. 2 weeks later, I was back in the building, but everything was different. Chief Information Security Officer, corner office, direct board access. and a parking spot with my name on it, spelled correctly. The first thing I did was log into the federal portals and begin the verification process I should have completed my last day as an employee. The process Hayden didn't know existed. Forms, certifications, biometric verification, the whole bureaucratic dance I'd been doing for 15 years. It took 3 days to restore our federal authorizations. 3 days to unfreeze $25 million in daily transactions. 3 days to remind everyone why experience matters more than innovation when you're dealing with other people's money. Hayden kept his job, technically, but his new office was in the basement, and his business card said Digital Strategy Consultant. He never spoke to me directly, just sent passive-aggressive emails about collaboration opportunities that I ignored. On my first Friday back, I got a text from my daughter Emma. "Dad, tuition payment went through. Thanks. Also, your LinkedIn says you're a C-level executive now? What happened to just working with computers?" I smiled and typed back, "Turns out computers are more complicated than people think." That evening, I sat in my new office looking out at the city lights, thinking about the last month. I hadn't planned any of this, hadn't schemed or plotted. I'd just done my job, followed procedures, and trusted the system to work the way it was designed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just letting incompetence reveal itself and being ready when people realize they need competence back. I opened my laptop and started reviewing the quarterly compliance schedule. Same work I'd been doing for 15 years. But now everyone knew what happened when it didn't get done. The system had spoken, and it had said my name. I didn't destroy their system. I just stopped being the person who kept it from destroying itself. The real lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about the difference between being irreplaceable and being invisible until you're gone.